My name is Norman Duncan. I moved here to Miami, Florida, first time in 1946 in Coconut Grove, close to where my family and I live now. My father was a fisherman, and I continued his tradition. I remember fishing as being some of my first earliest experiences. We used to keep a boat down at the end of 22nd Avenue in the late 40s. We'd go out in the bay and fish for mackerel and snapper and those types of things. We moved away, and I went away to school in 1955. We moved back nearby the house in the same neighborhood that we lived before. And at that time, spinning was becoming popular, and we got our Garcia Mitchells and then Orvis 100 spinning reels. And about 1955, I got a job building custom fishing rods and repairing reels at Tackle Box Fishing Store, which is at 27th Avenue US 1. The proprietor was Jack Premack, and while I was working there, I met a lot of people that were influential in my development as a light tackle sport fisherman. Some of the ones that I remember well are Joe Brooks, Lee Cuddy, Eddie Miller, Arthur Barrell, Buddy Hawkins, Captain Bill Smith, and John Emery. I eventually went off to the Army. About 1960, I came back, and I constructed a rod wrapping machine on a long table in my garage at a house in Freeman Street. I started building my own rods and associating with other avid fishermen. A lot of us went to the University of Miami, took night classes there while we were working the day, and it was there that I met Chico and Flip and Big John and Medium John, and Little John is John Emery. The people that I met there, we would have classes, go to the hot shops, have classes at nighttime. After the classes, go to the hot shops, and then we would plan our fishing trips for the weekend. And we would go off down to the Keys or onto the West Coast or out in Biscayne Bay on these fishing trips. It was there that I started developing some of the, I guess, more modern tackle innovations. We were early users of fiberglass fly rods. I have one on display here as one of the first saltwater fiberglass fishing rods. Rod blank was manufactured in Oregon by Lama Glass, and it was used by Eddie Miller to set a lot of casting records in the late 50s and early 60s. At the time, I was acquiring blanks and fishing reels and cork and guides and all this type of paraphernalia to build rods in my garage. And my friends would come over and build their own rods. And these friends were the three Johns, John Samuels, John Davis, and John Emery, Chico Fernandez, Flip Pallett, numerous other people would come over, especially after work at night, and especially on Fridays, and we would build fishing rods and take them out and go fishing on the weekends. It was during this period that I had an association with Dick Snyder, one of the gentlemen that invented the hollow glass fishing rod out in Oregon. He moved to Miami, opened up a gator glass rod company, and from some of the rods I'd seen in California, I urged him to build a fast taper 8-foot spinning rod that would be an improvement upon the slow taper, sort of sloggy actioned spinning rods that were used at the time. The reason we needed a rod with more backbone and a faster taper was that we had improved fishing line, improved knots. With the old softer rods, you couldn't pressure the fish quite so well. You couldn't fish the line to its optimum. You couldn't pressure the fish. After we developed some of these knots, like the 20 times around knot, I adapted that to light tackle sport fishing. This rod, one of which is on display, the first one that I built, uses some advanced techniques that, like roller tops and small first guides, that even today is not used in deep jigging or light tackle sport fishing for spinning rods. The innovator in that field was Bob McChristensen. His name was Captain Mac. He made the Seamaster reels. His company's still in business. He made the first modern saltwater fly reels. Prior to his Seamaster fly reel, there were no reels that would stand up to the saltwater fish. The only thing that was available was the old Vom Hoffs, which didn't have an adequate drag. They were a beautiful reel. The reel that's on the display here, the Seamaster reel, is the first direct drive reel that I had Bob McChristensen build, and subsequently that reel became probably that's still considered the finest, I feel, the finest saltwater fly reel. There's a lot of imitators now, but he was the first. Also on the spinning rod in display, there's the popular spinning reels in that day were the Centaur reels imported from France, which were high quality reels. There was Luxors also, which were a good high quality reel. They were much better quality than the Garcia Mitchells that were sort of the common reel that was most widely available. The Centaur Carib that's on the rod, on the deep jigging spinning rod that's on display, is the first Carib reel imported in the United States. I acquired that reel, made some modifications to it, and subsequently that reel became very popular and was the popular reel in the late 60s and into the 70s, until we had the proliferation of the modern spinning reels. There are reels that are of equal quality. However, that reel I acquired around 1962, and I'm still fishing it, and it still works as good as any reel on the market. And I've put a lot of fish through the guides on that reel. There are a lot of other innovations that we worked on there. In these late night sessions, we would design rods, measure where to put the guides, where to cast the best, modify the location of the guides for fly rods to get the least amount of friction with casting. We'd even experiment with fly lines. We made some of the early monofilament fly lines. We even experimented with with lead core lines. Lead core lines are used for trolling in deep lakes and in the northern climes for lake trout. It's used, lead core lines was used some degree trolling in the ocean to get the lure down, to get the trolling lure bait down deep. At the time, in the early 60s, we didn't have the modern high-density saltwater fly lines available, so we proceeded to make whatever we couldn't get. We would proceed to make and innovate with these things. One of the things that I made was a shooting head with a braided running line out of a lead core line that I acquired up north. Well, we would practice casting out in the front of my house on Freeman Street, and so Chico kind of liked this lead core casting head, and he was casting 150 feet or more with this thing, and he says, "Man, this thing is great, and bigger, heavier rod, a bigger lead core, and get on there." And unfortunately, one evening he was casting kind of a large loop on his back cast, and his back cast wrapped around 33,000 volts of power line up on the power pole in front of my house, and promptly shorted out when it hit the ground, and sparks and hot lead, and everybody was flying everywhere. So that was the last try at our practice casting the lead core lines around power lines. I'm sure Chico remembers the action. It was one of the more spectacular things that happened. I feel one of my most important accomplishments was when we started deep jigging in the early 60s and late 50s. One of the weak links was the knot that attaches the leader to the line. The best knot available at the time was a clinch knot. It was either tied to a swivel at the end of the leader or a loop at the end of the leader. I was searching around I think it was in 1960, for a better knot. Well, at the time I started working for the county down at the new port of Miami, and at lunchtime we used to hang around Pier 5. I got friendly with one of the charter boat captains by the name of Gary Simmons. He was a captain of the Silver King boat. He was a young guy and interested in light tackle fishing also. And I told him about my looking for a knot. He says, well, he told me, he says, well, there's this knot that a lot of the trawlers use that was apparently developed for linen line, which has a low knot strength, that they started using on the Dacron lines, which were just coming out at the time. And it improved the knot strength. It was sort of a hand-tied clinch knot that they called it the Bimini twist, and it required two people to tie, one person to turn the loop and hold it apart, and another person working down the coils by hand. And I said, well, you know, what does it test? He said, well, it tests 100%. I said, no, that's what I'm looking for. After he showed me how to tie the knot, I sat around trying to figure out how to tie it by one person in small monofilament. I came up with the idea of spinning a loop with my hand, then putting the loop over my knee and feeding pushing the finger into the loop, pushing the coils up, and then feeding the line coiling back over the spirals to create the 20 times around knot. I started showing people this knot. It caught on immediately because there was a real need for it. I wasn't the person that came up with the original idea, but I was the person that came up with the modern way of tying it and the concept of using it for light tackle sport fishing. In the early 60s, I was trying to develop a new way of tying the nail knot, which is used to tie the butt of the fly leader to the fly line. When you need a nail or a tube to do this, and to do it out in the boat with the winds and everything is a little difficult. I was trying to figure out a way to do it without a nail. I would tie a knot with the butt monofilament around the leader, and I hold around the fly line. I would hold the fly line straight and pull the knot up. I was having trouble with the fly line coating, and so in order to develop this technique, I decided to tie this around the monofilament itself. And as soon as I did that, I realized I had created a new knot. The knot I called a Duncan loop. It's not a very strong knot, but it's a very useful knot. It's the easiest knot to tie in heavy monofilament. It was eventually popularized by Vic Dunaway as the uni knot. It's has many useful applications, including looping on and off leaders, looping backing. One of the most useful is tying a saltwater fly to a heavy monofilament tippet. This is probably the smoothest and easiest knot. If the tag end is cut off at an angle, it gives a very smooth knot that doesn't foul or snag or catch weeds. The strength of the knot is not very good, but it's usually used for heavier monofilament and leaders, and you have a weaker link somewhere else.